Stray dog begs for food at restaurant, but when workers follow him home. Tears everywhere. The evening rush at Maria's kitchen was just winding down when Sophia, one of the waitresses, first noticed him. A lean, brown dog with gentle eyes, sitting quietly by the back door. Unlike the usual strays that sometimes pass through hoping for scraps, this one didn't bark or scratch at the door. He simply sat there, his eyes fixed on the kitchen with an almost human-like patience. "Marco, come look at this," Sophia called to the head chef who was cleaning up after the dinner service. "There's something different about this one." Marco, a burly man with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands, peered through the window. The dog's ribs were visible through his dusty coat, but there was a dignity in his posture that touched something in Marco's heart. Without hesitation, he gathered some leftover chicken and rice in a bowl. "Just this once," he said firmly, though Sophia could see the softness in his eyes. "We can't start feeding every stray in the neighborhood." But as Marco opened the door and set down the bowl, the dog didn't immediately dive for the food as they expected. Instead, he looked up at them, his tail wagging gently, as if asking permission. Only when Marco nodded did the dog begin to eat, taking measured bites despite his obvious hunger. "I've never seen anything like it," Sophia whispered. "He has manners better than some of our customers." They watched as the dog finished his meal, carefully licking the bowl clean. Then, to their surprise, he picked up the empty bowl in his mouth and brought it back to Marco's feet, as if returning borrowed dishes. "Well, I'll be," Marco chuckled, bending down to retrieve the bowl. "You're quite the gentleman, aren't you?" The dog wagged his tail once more, then turned and trotted away into the gathering dusk. Sophia and Marco shared a look, both knowing that just this once had already become a promise of more to come. Over the next few days, the dog returned at the same time each evening. The staff began to look forward to his visits, and Marco always made sure to set aside a portion of fresh food, not just leftovers. They named him Caballero, gentleman in Spanish, for his impeccable manners. But on the fourth evening, something changed. After finishing his meal, instead of leaving immediately, Caballero looked back at Sophia and Marco with an almost pleading expression. He took a few steps away from the restaurant, then turned back, as if asking them to follow. "He wants us to go with him," Sophia realized. "Something's wrong." Marco glanced at the clock. They had finished closing up, and his curiosity was piqued. "Let's see where he leads us. But be careful, Sophia." They followed Caballero through the quiet streets of their small town, moving away from the well-lit main road into a more run-down neighborhood. The dog led them with purpose, occasionally looking back to ensure they were still following. Finally, he stopped in front of an old house that had clearly seen better days. The paint was peeling, the small garden overgrown, and several windows were boarded up. But what caught their attention was the soft whimpering coming from under the porch. As they approached cautiously, Caballero ducked beneath the wooden stairs. In the beam of Marco's phone flashlight, they saw what had driven the dog to seek their help: 2 tiny puppies, no more than a few weeks old, huddled together for warmth. "Oh my God," Sophia gasped. "He's been taking care of babies." But before they could process this discovery, a weak voice called out from the darkness of the house. "Who's there? Please, don't take them away." The voice that called out was frail but determined. Through the screen door, they could make out the silhouette of an elderly woman, her hand trembling as she held onto a wooden cane. "Ma'am," Marco called out gently, "we're from Maria's kitchen downtown. Your dog has been visiting us." He paused, realizing how strange this might sound. "Ah, so you're the ones," the woman replied, her voice softening. "He comes back smelling like good food. I told him to stop bothering people, but..." She shuffled forward, and in the dim porch light, they could see her properly for the first time. The woman was thin, almost fragile-looking, dressed in clothes that had seen better days. But like Caballero, there was a dignity about her that transcended her circumstances. Her white hair was neatly combed, and her eyes, though tired, were clear and intelligent. "I'm Elena," she said, managing a small smile. "And I see you've met my unexpected family." Sophia stepped forward, her heart aching at the situation before her. "The puppies? Are they okay?" Elena's face clouded with worry. "Caballero found them in the storm drain 2 weeks ago. Their mother..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "He's been trying his best to care for them, and I help when I can. But..." She gestured helplessly at her surroundings. Marco and Sophia exchanged glances, years of working together allowing them to communicate without words. Sophia nodded slightly, and Marco cleared his throat. "Elena, would you allow us to help? We have plenty of food at the restaurant, and I know our local vet would be happy to check on the puppies." Elena hesitated, pride warring with necessity on her face. Caballero, as if sensing her uncertainty, emerged from under the porch and pressed against her leg supportively. The gesture seemed to help her decide. "I've learned," she said slowly, "that sometimes angels come in unexpected forms, even as hungry dogs at restaurant doors." She smiled down at Caballero. "Please come in. Though I'm afraid I don't have much to offer." The interior of the house told a story of better days long past. Faded photographs on the walls showed a younger Elena with what appeared to be her late husband, their smiles frozen in happier times. The furniture was old but meticulously clean, and despite the obvious poverty, there was an attempt to maintain order and dignity. In one corner, Elena had created a makeshift bed for the puppies using old blankets and what appeared to be her own sweaters. Caballero had clearly been doing his best, bringing them whatever food he could find, but the puppies were thin and needed proper care. "Tomorrow morning," Sophia said decisively, "we're bringing proper puppy formula and supplies. And Elena..." She hesitated, then pressed forward. "We'd like to bring you some food as well." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I can't pay. Consider it an investment," Marco interrupted gently. "In family, because that's what we are at Maria's Kitchen, a family. And it seems like your family," he gestured to Caballero and the puppies, "has chosen to connect with ours." As if understanding the importance of the moment, Caballero wagged his tail and nuzzled Elena's hand. One of the puppies let out a tiny yip, causing everyone to laugh, breaking the tension. Before leaving that night, Sophia and Marco made sure Elena had their phone numbers. They promised to return the next day, their minds already racing with plans to help this unexpected family they discovered. Walking back to the restaurant, Sophia wiped tears from her eyes. "You know this is just the beginning, right?" Marco nodded, his expression determined. "Sometimes the best things in life start with a hungry dog at your door." The next morning, before the restaurant opened, Marco and Sophia arrived at Elena's house with their arms full of supplies. They'd stopped at the pet store when it opened, purchasing puppy formula, proper feeding bottles, warm bedding, and various puppy supplies. They'd also brought containers of fresh food from the restaurant, enough for both Elena and Caballero. Dr. Rivera, the local veterinarian and a regular customer at Maria's Kitchen, had agreed to make a house call after hearing their story. She arrived just as they were setting up the supplies, her kind face lighting up when she saw the puppies. Well, she said, kneeling to examine them. "You've done an amazing job, Caballero. Most male dogs wouldn't know how to care for orphan puppies." She looked up at Elena. "He must have learned from watching you." Elena blushed slightly, watching as Dr. Rivera checked the puppies thoroughly. "I did what I could, but it's been difficult." The examination revealed that while the puppies were undernourished, they were otherwise healthy. "They're fighters," Dr. Rivera declared, "just like their adoptive father." She showed Elena and Sophia how to properly prepare and feed the formula, while Marco set about fixing some loose boards on the porch. As they worked, Elena gradually began to share her story. She and her husband had lived in the house for 40 years, but after his death 3 years ago, things had become increasingly difficult. The pension barely covered the basics, and the house had fallen into disrepair. When Caballero showed up 6 months ago, thin and scared, she'd shared what little food she had. "He gave me a reason to keep going," she admitted quietly. "Someone to talk to." Then when he found the puppies, she smiled. Well, suddenly I had a purpose again. Sophia, who had been listening while feeding one of the puppies, spoke up. Elena, the restaurant. We could use some help with prep work in the mornings. Just a few hours, nothing too strenuous. Would you be interested? Elena's eyes widened. At my age? But age brings wisdom, Marco called from the porch. And Maria's kitchen could use some wisdom. Besides, I've seen how clean you keep this house despite everything. That's exactly the kind of attention to detail we need. The offer was more than just a job. It was a lifeline, a way to help Elena maintain her dignity while improving her situation. After some gentle persuasion, she agreed to try it for a week. As they were preparing to leave, Dr. Rivera pulled Sophia aside. The house isn't safe, she whispered. The wiring is old, and there's some structural damage. She shouldn't be living here, especially not with winter coming. Sophia nodded, having noticed the same issues. We're working on it, one step at a time. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Elena would come to the restaurant early each morning, helping with prep work while learning the rhythms of the kitchen. She proved to be a natural, her careful attention to detail and wealth of cooking experience making her an invaluable addition to the team. The staff arranged for someone to check on the puppies during the day, and Caballero proved to be an excellent father, never straying far from his charges. The puppies, now named Luna and Sol, grew stronger each day, their playful antics bringing joy to everyone who visited. Word spread through the small town about Elena and Caballero's story. Customers began leaving extra tips specifically to help with house repairs, and local contractors offered their services at reduced rates. The community rallied around them in ways Elena never expected. But it was the small moments that meant the most. Elena teaching Sophia her secret recipe for sofrito, Marco fixing Elena's ancient radio so she could listen to music while she worked, the staff celebrating when the puppies took their first wobbly steps across the kitchen floor. One evening, as they were closing up, Elena watched Caballero playing gently with his puppies in the restaurant's back garden. You know, she said softly, I used to think I was taking care of him, but really he was taking care of me. He knew exactly where to go to find help for all of us. Sophia squeezed her hand. Sometimes the best angels have 4 legs and fur. As autumn crept into winter, the situation at Elena's house became increasingly concerning. Despite the community's efforts to help with repairs, the old structure was simply too far gone. One particularly cold morning, Marco arrived early to find Elena huddled in the kitchen with the puppies and Caballero, trying to stay warm after the ancient heating system had finally given out. That was the last straw for Marco. During the staff meeting that afternoon, he shared an idea that had been forming in his mind for weeks. The apartment above the restaurant, he began, looking at the assembled staff. It's been empty since my mother moved to Florida. It's not huge, but it's warm, safe, and... He smiled at Elena, who was listening with wide eyes. It would be perfect for a family of 4. The staff immediately erupted in enthusiastic agreement. The apartment had been sitting unused, and the thought of Elena, Caballero, and the puppies living there seemed perfect. But Elena hesitated. Marco, I couldn't possibly... She started, but Sophia interrupted. Elena, remember what you said about angels coming in unexpected forms? Well, sometimes they come in the form of family making room for more family. Tears welled in Elena's eyes as she looked around at the faces of people who, in just a few short months, had become more than just co-workers. They had become her support system, her champions, her family. The move was organized with military precision. The staff coordinated their efforts, with some helping Elena sort through decades of memories, while others prepared the apartment. They discovered that Elena had quite a collection of old recipes, handwritten by her grandmother, which Marco immediately declared would become special features on the restaurant's menu. Caballero supervised the entire operation with remarkable attention, seeming to understand that this was a positive change. He would carry small items up the stairs to the apartment, proud to be helping, while keeping an eye on Luna and Sol, who were now active 3-month-old puppies full of energy and mischief. The day Elena officially moved in was celebrated with a special dinner in the restaurant. The entire staff, along with regular customers who had become part of their extended family, gathered to welcome Elena to her new home. Dr. Rivera brought special beds for the dogs, and the local hardware store owner presented Elena with a key to her own private entrance to the building. That night, as Elena sat in her new living room, warm and safe, with Caballero stretched out at her feet and the puppies sleeping nearby, she wrote in her diary, "Life has a funny way of working out. When John died, I thought my story was ending. I felt invisible, forgotten. Then a hungry dog showed up at my door, and somehow that one act of kindness, sharing what little I had set in motion, a miracle. Now I have a job I love, a warm home, and more family than I ever dreamed possible." Caballero knew exactly what he was doing when he went to Maria's kitchen that first night. He wasn't just looking for food. He was looking for hope. And he found it not just for himself and his puppies, but for me too. The restaurant thrived with Elena's influence. Her grandmother's recipes became customer favorites, and she started teaching cooking classes on Sunday afternoons, sharing the wisdom of generations with eager students. Luna and Sol became the restaurant's unofficial mascots, charming customers with their playful antics, while Caballero maintained his dignified oversight of his growing family. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was in Elena herself. The worried, isolated woman they'd first met was replaced by someone who smiled easily, laughed often, and moved with renewed purpose. Her eyes sparkled when she talked about the future, and she had plans, so many plans. Spring arrived, bringing with it new possibilities. Elena's cooking classes had become so popular that there was now a waiting list, and her special Sunday Abuela's menu had people driving from neighboring towns just to taste her traditional recipes. Luna and Sol, now nearly grown, had developed their father's impeccable manners and helped welcome customers with gentle wags and friendly nuzzles. One rainy afternoon, a woman came into the restaurant, soaked and distressed. Her name was Carmen, and she just lost her job. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, too proud to ask for help. Elena, recognizing the look of someone in need, the same look she'd had not so long ago, immediately sat her down with a bowl of hot soup. "Sometimes," Elena told her, as Caballero settled supportively at Carmen's feet, "accepting help is its own kind of strength." That conversation led to another inspiration. With Marco's blessing, Elena started what they called Hope's Kitchen, a weekly event where people in need could come for a hot meal and, more importantly, a chance to connect with others who understood their struggles. After all, Elena would say, everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, even when they're going through hard times. The program grew, and soon they were doing more than just serving meals. Regular customers began offering job leads, and local business owners would come to Hope's Kitchen specifically to meet potential employees. Carmen, who had accounting experience, eventually became the restaurant's bookkeeper. Luna and Sol proved to have inherited their father's intuition for people in need. They would often sit beside those who seemed most troubled, offering silent comfort just as Caballero had done for Elena in her darkest days. The puppies, no longer puppies but elegant young dogs, became known throughout the town as the Hope's Kitchen Angels. 1 year to the day after Caballero first appeared at the restaurant's back door, they held a special celebration. The mayor came to present Elena and the restaurant with a community service award. But the real surprise was what the regular customers had organized. They had created a fund in Caballero's name at the local animal shelter, specifically to help elderly people keep and care for their pets during financial hardships. The first recipient was an old man named George, who had been considering surrendering his aging cat because he couldn't afford the veterinary bills. "No one should have to choose between eating and keeping their best friend," Elena declared, her voice firm as she hugged George and handed him the first grant check. That evening, after the celebration, Elena sat in her favorite chair by the window, watching the sunset with Caballero at her feet and Luna and Sol curled up nearby. Marco and Sofia joined her, bringing up cups of her favorite chamomile tea. "Did you ever imagine," Sofia asked, "that one hungry dog could change so many lives?" Elena smiled, reaching down to scratch Caballero's ears. "He taught me something important," she said softly. "When you have nothing left but love to give, give it anyway, because love multiplies. Look at what his love did. It didn't just save me or the puppies. It created this whole beautiful thing we have now." Marco nodded, looking around the cozy apartment that had become a gathering place for their extended restaurant family. "You know what my mother used to say? God works in mysterious ways, but usually through ordinary people, and sometimes through extraordinary dogs." The story of Caballero and Elena became something of a local legend, shared over countless meals at Maria's kitchen. But perhaps the most beautiful part was how their story continued to inspire new chapters of hope and healing. 2 years after that first encounter at the restaurant's back door, Hope's Kitchen had grown into a full-fledged community support network. Elena's apartment often hosted informal counseling sessions, where she would serve her famous chamomile tea while sharing her wisdom with others facing similar struggles to those she had overcome. Caballero, now graying slightly around his muzzle but still maintaining his gentle dignity, had earned his therapy dog certification. Every Wednesday, he would accompany Elena to the local senior center, where they would spend the afternoon visiting with residents. Luna and Sol followed in their father's paw-steps, working with the local children's reading program, where young students practiced reading aloud to the patient, attentive dogs. One particularly meaningful moment came when an elderly woman named Rosa arrived at Hope's Kitchen one evening, clearly distressed. Her story was painfully familiar to Elena, widowed, struggling with bills, and worried about keeping her small house. But what brought tears to Elena's eyes was the elderly beagle mix sitting quietly at Rosa's feet, looking up at his owner with devoted concern. "He's all I have left," Rosa whispered. "But I can barely feed myself, let alone—" Before she could finish, Elena was already in motion, gathering the staff for an impromptu meeting. Within days, Rosa had a part-time job helping with the restaurant's gardens, Elena's newest project, providing fresh herbs and vegetables for the kitchen. And her dog was enrolled in Dr. Rivera's senior pet wellness program, sponsored by the Caballero Fund. "You see," Elena explained to Rosa, as they watched their dogs play gently in the restaurant's back garden. "Sometimes what looks like the end of your story is actually just the beginning of a better chapter. You just need someone to help you turn the page." The restaurant itself had evolved, becoming more than just a place to eat. The walls were now adorned with photos telling their story: Caballero's first night at the door, Elena's cooking classes, the puppies growing up, and countless moments of community coming together. Each picture represented a thread in the tapestry of love and support they had woven together. Marco, who had always run a good restaurant, found himself running something far more meaningful, a place where food nourished not just bodies but souls, where kindness was the most important ingredient in every dish served. On quiet evenings, Elena would often sit in her window, watching the sunset with her furry family around her. She kept a journal of all the lives touched by their story: the homeless man who now managed their food delivery program, the troubled teen who found purpose helping with the dogs, the countless elderly people who found community through Hope's Kitchen. "It's remarkable," she wrote one evening, "how love grows. It starts with one small act of kindness, sharing food with a hungry dog, and spreads like ripples in a pond, touching lives in ways you never imagined possible." Caballero taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about the connections we make when we open our hearts to others. As if hearing his name in her thoughts, Caballero lifted his head from his bed and gave her that same gentle look he'd had since the first day, a look that seemed to say, "See? I knew exactly what I was doing when I chose you." Luna and Sol, sprawled nearby, wagged their tails in sleepy agreement. Through the open window came the sounds of the restaurant below, dishes clinking, people laughing, the warm buzz of community and connection that had become the heartbeat of their shared life. "Yes?" Elena whispered, reaching down to pat Caballero's head. "You knew exactly what you were doing, my friend. You knew that sometimes the greatest acts of love start with the smallest acts of kindness, and that true family can be found in the most unexpected places." And in the growing dusk, as the lights of Maria's kitchen brightened against the evening sky, their story continued to unfold, touching more lives, creating more connections, proving that when love is the main ingredient, there's always enough to go around.